Hi everyone, I'm Amina. This is my channel, Amina Inspired. It looks a little bit different today because of course this is part 2 with Professor Fielding and whoever else comes in here to join us. So far we've got Meekly, Lulu and Lucille, but you might see me like a little bit distracted while I add people on. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this. I don't really know what kind of questions we're going to get, but I do know that we're going to do, Prof Fielding is going to do his best to answer them. And yeah, let's just grow together, learn and grow. Okay, so with that, I want to say thank you so much, Prof. Fielding. You are a virologist and you are the Director of Research at UWC. And so the last time we spoke, it was about the basics. What is COVID? Because there's a lot of people that still don't believe that COVID exists. And then also what's in the vaccine and whether or not we need to use it. So those are the kind of things that we covered. But I'm willing to go with anyone's questions. If anyone wants to go first, Lucille, do you want to ask a question?
Amina, can I just add something? Thank you for having me again, and welcome to everybody that's attending live. Just for the record, I am not a medical doctor.
Yes.
So I'm not giving medical opinion. What I am giving is scientific opinion. And the scientific opinion is very much based on current data during this pandemic, but also from the previous coronavirus studies.
Yes.
As we mentioned before, we have 7 human coronaviruses. Not everybody agrees with or agree with my opinions, but this is based on work that I've done and the work of others. So I'll try to be as objective as possible, give the positives and the negatives. Yeah. And the idea is not to convince anybody to take the vaccine or not take the vaccine. Is to empower people by giving them the information and to hopefully guide them in their decision making. So I think that's just very important to get out there. But thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Yeah, we're not here to convince anyone, just for them to make up their own minds. Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Lucille.
Okay, so I'll start with the first question, Prof. Fielding. I think for me, so I have been vaccinated. I've had the Johnson & Johnson. Basically because I deal with my parents who are both have comorbidities. I wanted to be safe around them, and I was skeptical at first. I honestly also thought, you know, what is in the vaccine? So I was kind of very worried about what is in the vaccine. You know, I've only heard about COVID last year, but I know that you've been studying it for 10 years. It's apparently been around for a while. It's just speared its head in 2020. And so I think for me, I'm now happy. I'm actually happy I have the vaccine. I've made peace with it. But for me, it's the constant questions that get answered which I find on Facebook, and it's quite disturbing, is the fact that they feel that the vaccine is an experiment. And so for me is, could you just kind of help me to understand that this isn't an experiment? It is something that has probably been studied, you know, together with the COVID virus. So I would just like that myth or whatever to be kind of, you know, kind of just taken out of the air and kind of cleared, put it there. Yeah.
Thanks, Lucille. Just for clarity, so COVID is only around since last year. This is the first time last year that this particular human coronavirus was identified. And that's why it's called COVID-19, because it was first identified in December 2019. The other 6 human coronaviruses are in the same family as the virus that causes COVID. But there's a lot that we can learn from the other 6 that we're seeing with this virus as well now. So the virus causing COVID-19 is called SARS coronavirus 2. And SARS stands for severe acute respiratory syndrome. What does that mean? whole lot of symptoms of the respiratory tract, and it's very bad. That's what the name means. And it's 2 because the first deadly coronavirus was identified 2003, and then the second deadly one was identified in 2012. The other 4 are circulating every year. We've been studying them since 1960s, and they cause the common cold. So of the 7, only 3 is deadly. What you're asking is not unique to you. So yes, the vaccine that we're using for COVID, it's the first time that it's used for a human coronavirus disease. The technology has been used to fight cancer. There's one for animals, and it's been studied in the lab for a long time. If you follow the news very closely, you'll see only about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Pfizer's vaccine was approved by the FDA. And now the next one is being considered for final approval. So the vaccines for a very long time, up to last month, was approved globally for emergency use only. So what does that mean? It means that if you have a new treatment, which would be a vaccine or a drug or a medication, and it can save lives, you are ethically obliged to use it, whether it's still being tested or not. However, you can only use it widespread if it's been shown to be safe. And that was what the initial studies about this vaccine was about. So in South Africa, you heard about the Sizonke trial. That's when we gave our medical frontline workers the Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer was tested, and AstraZeneca was tested. That was trial 3B, and that was now to look at it at the largest scale. Now the vaccines are, as we have more and more data, and we see now with a big rollout that it is safe, it will be finally approved. So for general use. So we must be very careful that we say that it is a big trial and that we were guinea pigs. That's not how we should see it. Mm-hmm. Ethically, we were bound to make this available because people were dying. But it can only be ethically be made available if the risks associated with the vaccine is far outweighed by the risks associated with the medication or the vaccine. So the data is very clear that there are side effects, there are extreme side effects, but the latter is in very, very small percentage of people.
Brilliant. That's great to know. So can I ask one more question? I don't want to take over this whole thing. So in terms of the ivermectin, you know, there's the ivermectin as well. So a lot of people might say, but why is ivermectin not approved medically? Well, it is sort of approved, I believe, but particularly for COVID-19. Is it safe to use? Is it something that some people feel should be an option to the vaccine?
It is not an option to the vaccine. I've never been a fan using ivermectin as a prophylactic, which means to prevent infection. There are some very good studies that show that ivermectin decreases death rates and stays in hospitals. But for every one of those papers, there's another paper that says that it's not effective. Safety for ivermectin, I don't think is an issue. It's been used for decades to treat parasitic infections. So people infected with worms globally have been using it for decades. So the real debate about ivermectin should be, is it effective in treating COVID-19? It has been approved in many countries for compassionate use. And I've always said, even though it is not officially part of the treatment regimen, if I have somebody that's in ICU that is deadly ill, and it was my family, that I would speak to my doctor to get ivermectin. The other concern is that people are using ivermectin designed or developed for animal use. I do not agree with that at all, because something for animals is not necessarily safe for humans.
Yes.
So if you speak to your doctor in severe cases, so I was in ICU not in ICU, I was in hospital for 2 weeks with severe COVID pneumonia. And this is not me endorsing the use of ivermectin, but I spoke to my doctor and I use ivermectin and I use remdesivir, which is an anti-HIV drug that has been approved globally.
Okay.
So my doctor is one of those GPs who supports the compassionate use of it. But you need to speak for any drug, speak to your primary healthcare provider before you're using it, please.
Yeah.
Because there can be interaction between drugs as well.
Yeah. So why? Okay, I'm going to ask the last question. I don't want to. I have so many questions. So why are people so skeptical of the vaccine per se? You know, if we look at like warfarin that you use, you know, that's not a very safe. It has side effects. There are some things you can't use if you use warfarin. You use chemotherapy. So that's my argument actually in why I would trust the scientists to say, all right, they won't have all the answers, but there is a side effect in everything that you take. And you're not sure what is in your ibuprofen, for instance, you know, so, but yet we take it and we don't question it. But so my thing is, I'm wondering, is it just people not trusting government, or are they just not enjoying the fact that their rights are being, it's being infringed on them, or what is the reason? Why is there so many anti-vaxxers, and why are so many professional people supporting anti-vax?
Lucille, you raise a very important point. You look at any drug that you buy, even off the shelf. You go to any of your supermarkets and buy a cough mixture. Take out the pamphlet that's in there and open it up. Half of that pamphlet will probably have mild side effects, more major side effects, and extreme side effects. Every drug and every vaccine would have side effects. None of these are 100% effective. I think the biggest problem we're facing at the moment, and I'm not in favor of vaccinating everybody. For me, it is about protecting those at highest risk of severe disease, hospitalization, and death. And that's why I'm in favor of strategic vaccinations. You look at the data, it is definitely effective in protecting people, high-risk people from hospitalization, death, and extreme severe disease. About June last year, the WHO said, unfortunately, because of social media, we're not only facing an epidemic, we're also facing an infodemic. So there's this gluttony of information out there. And unfortunately, I listened to somebody this morning that was saying, and I can't unfortunately give the person credit because I can't remember who said it. He said they've noticed that with false information, it feeds something inside of us. So by the time fake news has circumvented the globe, the truth is still putting on its shoes. So for some reason, you know, it's probably the same reason people jump out of a plane with a parachute tied to their back. It's that human nature, I need to be scared of something. I share scientific fact. If I get 1,500 reads on Twitter, it's a lot. Somebody comes and warps that truth and gets 2 million reads. So I think unfortunately social media is driving this, and for some reason everybody is a COVID expert at the moment, which is very dangerous.
That is so true. Yeah, very true. Yeah, sure. That's interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, so I'll let someone else ask questions because else I'll ask I'll overtake this.
No, that's fine. We can always come back to you, Lucille.
When I'm done with this, I'll be a virologist.
Yes.
With credible data. Data.
Okay, so Mikli, I know you also have a question for Prof Fielding.
All right. Greetings. Can you
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are definitely audible. Yes, go ahead.
All right. So my question is, since we touched on the effects, now my question is, if let's say you take the vaccine, right, and then it happens that maybe there's a defect. I'm not saying that there are defects or they are not, but I'm saying if it happens that there is a defect, will you be able to sue the company which issued that vaccine? Because for if maybe I'm going to, for example, Discam and I buy something that has a defect, I am able to sue them. But with what I've heard also in social media and people are saying that you're not able to sue the companies that are distributing the vaccines. So I see clarity on that.
Mishley, thank you for that very difficult question. Unfortunately, it's a law question, and I don't want to tread there. I know certain countries have created funds for compensation. I don't know what the status in South Africa is, but these companies have negotiated with the various countries where the vaccines have been distributed. You are correct. Let me answer you what I can answer you from that question. You are correct. There are side effects. The vast majority of those are mild side effects. So you have sensitivity at the site of the injection. You feel body aches, mild aches. You feel slightly fluey. That typically clears within 3 to 3.5 days. There are some adverse side effects, or very bad ones. And depending on the vaccine, it could include blood clots, and it could include inflammation of the heart muscle or the inflammation of the lining around the heart. Both of those adverse side effects have now been listed on the vaccines. So we are aware of them, but it's a fraction of a percentage of people who are receiving the vaccines. And it seems as though, depending on which vaccine you're looking at, that it affects younger people. Sometimes males, other times females, so it depends on the population group that you are looking at. But the side effects reported are the risk for severe ones are extremely small. For your law question, unfortunately, I would not be able to answer that.
Yeah, I think that is something that a lot of people feel. Sorry, Mifli, do you want to respond?
No. I was just going to say thank you. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yes, thank you.
But I have another question as well.
Please go ahead.
And yeah, my questions may be a bit offside now, but just the question that I have. So basically, this is not a question. It's just I'm asking for your opinion. So based on also what people are saying that everyone should get vaccinated and all that issue. Now, my question is, do you think that we will get to a point where we need everyone to be vaccinated? In other words, would it be mandatory? Because looking at what's happening, the people who are supporting vaccine, I'm not saying all of them, just including some of them and some who have been close to me, they are saying that those people who don't want to get vaccine are wrong people. No, they're putting bad words into them because they're saying, you guys are spreading the corona, you guys are spreading. They don't understand why you don't want to get the vaccine because it is safe, you can trust the government, which is actually the opposite to some of them. They don't trust the government. I mean, we have seen a lot of things happening. So my question is, do you think that we would get to that point, especially as university students?
Meshle, I hope not. I hope it does not become mandatory. I hope we do not look at vaccine passports, especially based on the way we're making those decisions and how we're having those discussions. I guarantee you speak to some of my very esteemed colleagues, national and international, and they will disagree with me totally, and they would say everybody should be vaccinated. I'm saying, if we look at what these vaccines are effective at doing, it's preventing deaths. The people at biggest risks, at the risk of death, hospitalization, and severe disease are people with comorbidities, especially the elderly. So why don't we vaccinate them and protect them? When we have this discussion about mandatory vaccines and COVID passports, we are forgetting that people who are naturally immune, so they were infected and then they got healthy, they actually protected as well. So the debate is, how long do you remain protected afterwards? From the data that I've vaccine, anybody who's been infected the last 6-7 months was very likely infected with Delta. So they will more than likely have better protection against infection from Delta compared to a vaccinated person. Vaccinated people can also become infected and spread the disease. So when we're having this discussion, I think as a collective, we're looking at it from a very one-sided perspective, and that's why I hope that we do not see this mandatory vaccination and COVID vaccine passports based on the way we're currently discussing it. I think based on scientific data, it does not make sense at the moment yet.
Can I just,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Mikhail. Just to reiterate what you just said, I'm just going to pick a small part out now, Bertie. I'm sorry, because I think we just have to put a light on it right now, because I'm getting a lot of this as somebody that's unvaccinated. When people are saying things like, you're not doing your part and you're going to spread the vaccine. And what you just said is that vaccinated people can also spread. So that was actually my question. Is it fair to say that both vaccinated and unvaccinated people can spread COVID? I hope that's not a
yes.
So is the answer yes? Both.
The answer is yes. So remember, the vaccine is not 100% effective, and that's why even though you're fully vaccinated, you would still be advised wear your mask, social distancing, sanitize your hands. Those who have gone for the vaccine, you probably told that after you received the vaccine. So there is still a risk. Not everybody is protected from infection. They are protected from severe disease, 98, 97%, depending on the age group, the population, and the vaccine. And very often the gender as well. So we must be very careful how we pass almost judgment. The anti-vaxxers will tell you, don't take the vaccine. The ones who believe in everybody should be vaccinated judge you for not taking the vaccine. And that's why I said, I've been at home now for about 4 or 5 weeks. I was definitely infected with Delta. So I have anti-Delta antibodies in my body. Somebody who's received the vaccine will not have anti-Delta antibodies. They will have antibodies against alpha and beta in the original one. However, there is still protection. It seems as though these vaccines are still effective in the vast majority of people to offer some protection against the variants. Those who were infected naturally and recovered, they have some other antibodies to other parts of the virus as well. So immunity to this virus is more than just antibodies to one particular protein. It's more complex than that. And for some reason, we're leaving that out of the discussion as well. Yes, there are some studies that say people who have been infected and recover, if they take a shot, then the immune system is even stronger and you have better protection. Look at those studies. I am convinced that people who were infected longer than 6 to 7 months ago, so not with Delta, they should start considering again whether I take that booster shot, because now it could lead to better protection. So the one big study that both sides like using is a big study from Italy that said naturally infected people are 13 times more protected than somebody that's fully vaccinated. But that same study also said if the naturally infected person gets one shot of the vaccine, it's even more effective. But is 13 times more effective not enough? That's an aim for 15%. So we must be it's a very complex conversation.
Yes.
And everybody's body behaves differently.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so glad you said that, because I think I felt a very big guilt trip. I actually went with my husband for his second jab, and there was a big sign that said, now you can go hug your grandfather, your grandparents. And I thought, wow, so if I'm unvaccinated, I'm not allowed to hug them. And by the way, I do have antibodies. I'm going to check every 6 months to see, because I'm part of the unofficial control group until I have to travel. And welcome to everybody else that just joined. Yes, yes.
And just keep in mind, immunity is not just to do with antibodies.
Yes.
There are white blood cells that's important as well. So there are specific types of T cells and B cells, and they are responsible for long-term immunity. So there are studies that are showing now that somebody that was infected 2003 with SARS, with the SARS virus, the first deadly one, 11 years later still had T and B cells. That's one case only, so it's not going to be the same for everybody. And that's why I'm saying we need to keep in mind as well, I can receive the vaccine, you can receive the vaccine. Immunity might be longer in my body compared to yours. And that's the type of data and information we're getting now. And that's why you might see a month from now, I might totally change what I'm saying. So I've tried to base what I'm saying based on what the current data is showing.
And I appreciate that because I guess that's what scientists do. They wait for the data to come in. So we have a question from Fozia. She says, if the vaccine is more efficient, I guess, than natural immunity, how come they wane after 6 to 8 months?
All of them are going to wane after 6 to 8 months. Some studies are saying that after 7, 8, 9 months, you still have enough antibodies to protect. But remember, I've just said now that long-term immunity is not about antibodies. There are also B and T cells. So the antibody prevents the virus from getting into your cell. T cells would chomp up the infected cell. So once the virus is inside your cell, then the T cells eats up those cells. Then you get certain type of B cells that can make antibodies way later. Okay. And we're leaving that out of the discussion for some reason as well, and I don't understand why. So we've published a PhD student and I published an article in The Conversation where we speak about long-term immunity and T and B cells that needs to be looked at as well.
Are there is anyone studying this now? Like, I got a control group and doing an empirical study on natural immunity? Okay, is that you? So you guys are doing that right now?
No, so that was a review that we published. Okay. But there are large groups that are looking at this. The problem with this is that it is obviously long term. Yeah. The only company that I know that has said something about T cells and antibodies was Johnson & Johnson and their vaccine. And they said 9 months later, they still saw both. So for the antibodies, there is a decrease, but they could still see those white blood cells.
Okay, so is there any way that I can check? Is there any place I can check for my T cells and B cells? Because I would really love to know. Seriously, is there a lab in Cape Town?
I do not know who do that testing now.
You see, love to know. That's one thing, but okay, maybe I'm asking too much. Okay, so
no, you're too eager to donate blood, please. I see needles and I start sweating. So.
Oh, yes, that's true. Okay, so here's another question. Why are we using PCR tests if it cannot diagnose or distinguish rather between flu and variants of COVID?
So that's not accurate. So the PCR essentially makes more copies of what is present in your body, and it's designed in such a way that it only detects I'm going to call it the COVID virus, even though we know that it's SARS CoV2. It can only detect that virus. So it detects the genetic material in your body. If you look based on clinical symptoms, so what are you feeling and what the doctor can see with his eye, then it's very difficult to distinguish between flu and COVID. With Delta, it's now more like a head cold and sinusitis. So clinically, it's difficult to distinguish, but with PCR, it is specific and accurate. Everybody has seen CSI. So they go to the crime scene and they collect clinical samples, and then they take it to the lab, and then they can tell whether it's person A, B, C, D, or E. That's polymerase chain reaction, PCR. So you're making more of the genetic material in the person's body. That is present in the person's body. You're making more of it in the lab. So you're testing for the genetic material in the person.
Okay, so is it true that the CDC has revoked the PCR diagnostic because it cannot distinguish between the two forms?
No, so there are some rumors that it is. So what the question really refers to is it how sensitive and accurate is this test? This is unfortunately still our gold standard test. So it's the best test that we do have. There are some rapid tests, so you can go to the pharmacies and get a result within 15 and 30 minutes. Those two tests are different. The one will test for current infection, and it would be testing for parts of the virus in your body. The other one tests for antibodies. So you might not have the virus in your body anymore, but you were exposed at one point or the other. Those tests are not as accurate as the polymerase chain reaction or PCR test.
Okay, so for everyone here, if you want, you can also just put your mic on and you can feel free to ask the question directly. I think that a lot of things that might surprise people that you've said so far is that you don't think that everybody should get vaccinated, and that there are specific groups that strategically should get vaccinated because they're high risk. I think that the narrative out there is that, and I see it a lot on Facebook, like I've done my part. And then I feel like, oh, I'm not doing my part. And then also there's this whole fact that natural immunity is set aside. Like nobody really talks, I've watched on the news, nobody talks about natural immunity, when in actual fact, it's a biological fact that it is there. But it's encouraging to know that they're doing tests on this as well. So this is a very specific question. Dr. Kerry Mullins, the creator of the test, stated it cannot test if you are sick with COVID. Do you have a comment?
So Kerry Mullins actually won the Nobel Prize for the PCR test. The story goes the day that he heard he won, to celebrate, he went surfing. So a very interesting man. What PCR is a very sensitive test. If you do PCR, it does not necessarily mean that you are still infective, because it can detect very, very low numbers of genetic material in your body. So you could still be testing somebody later and they could still have, but it doesn't mean they're infective. What we need to do is we're doing these tests because they're extremely sensitive, and we can treat or isolate or hospitalize people as soon as possible and as quickly as possible. So you can go, the MRC, for instance, they're testing sewage, so raw sewage in our neighborhoods, and they can detect genetic material from this virus in sewage. It doesn't mean that the sewage can infect you. Genetic material is there, and at the moment that is good enough to assume with a high degree of certainty that somebody is infected. The only way to be 100% sure is to take a sample from that person, go into the laboratory, and then grow it in artificial cells, either human cells or monkey cells. That takes anything up to a week, and it is so expensive that it will never work for the large-scale numbers that we have to test.
Okay, that's very helpful. And yeah, so like I said, I don't know what questions are going to be asked, but that's good. Now we have some more information.
Can I just add with the earlier question, and I think you touched on it as well. So that earlier question about, do we vaccinate everybody? Do we count infected people as well? What do we do? The WHO, if you look at the new definition of herd immunity, so herd immunity says this is the number of people that we need to have antibodies so that the risk for everybody is lower. At the beginning of this outbreak, we said we need to vaccinate or have antibodies in 60 to 70% of people. The virus variants have become more transmissible, so they spread easier. Now we're saying we need about 90% of people. So more and more experts are globally saying we will not reach herd immunity. So forget about herd immunity. Let's find ways of living with this virus. And WHO, as I've mentioned, have just changed their definition of herd immunity. And they say it's the number of people who have antibodies from either vaccination or natural infections. And that's how I used to, over the decades, teach it to my students. When I lectured, that's how I taught my students. So we need to just keep that in mind as
That's
well.
encouraging.
I think we're reaching a point where we can't talk about herd immunity anymore.
Yeah, I think that's very encouraging, because at least we should accept that some people have antibodies and that should count for something as well. So I feel like I'm becoming the poster girl for the unvaccinated with antibodies. It's like I keep on telling people, don't, because I have a few people in my life that say, okay, Amina is not vaccinated, but they're high risk. They got comorbidities. And I'm like, no, you should probably get vaccinated because you can't use, and that's, I think you mentioned that's like, I think you called it risk for benefit, or what do you call that again?
Risk benefit ratio.
Risk benefit ratio. So yeah, you have to really look at your body and say, what is best for me, and not just like paint everybody with the same brush.
And you know where most of this comes from, Amina? It comes from the fact that we really do not know how long immunity from either the vaccine or natural immunity will last. I've always speculated since, and you can go look at my interviews, since about February, March last year, I said for the majority of people, it would probably last between 2 and 3 years. And what did the immunity from either the vaccine or the natural infections? And what did I base that on? On the studies done on the 4 circulating coronaviruses. However, if you look at the studies on those 4 human coronaviruses, it's very clear. Some people can be infected more than once in 1 year by the same virus. Others can go for a decade or longer not being infected by the same virus. But the vast majority, it seems, can be reinfected after 2 years, 3 years, maybe 1 year. It's very much dependent on the immune system of each person. And for some reason, we are not willing to be learning from history when it comes to COVID. So each time I'm asked a question in my interview when something new is published, then the journalist will ask me, or the presenter, so are you surprised? And I feel like such a fraud, because I say, no, I'm not surprised, because this is what we saw for the others.
Yeah.
And yes, it must still be confirmed for COVID, but this is what we could expect.
Okay, so we have 2 questions lined up, so I want to go to the first one. How likely is it, how true is it that the vaccine makes a person infertile for the purposes of control, of population control? So that was in.
So there is no scientific evidence for this. It would make no sense if my aim was population control. I would not make a drug that is highly effective in those ages above 55. That is not the reproductive years for the majority of people. So I would, if I want to do population control, I would target the younger groups. So the vaccine is most effective in the older groups. So there is no scientific data to support that.
Okay, so the next question is, over 90 countries, including South Africa, has asked the Department of Health and government to provide proof of isolation of SARS CoV2, and none of them could do that, including our president could not give us this information. Can you comment?
Just repeat that. I didn't get that. You broke up. You broke up.
Okay, so over 90 countries, including South Africa, has asked the Department of Health and government to provide proof of isolation of SARS CoV2, and none of them could do that, including our president, who could not give us this information. So can you comment on that?
So I do not know where that story comes from. If you go to the UWC website, or you go to news24.com and you do a search, SARS-CoV-2 virus isolated in South Africa, you will see the name Dr. Tasneem Suleiman, Professor Wolfgang Preischier from Stellenbosch, and Professor Megan Shaw. Tasneem Suleiman and Megan Shaw are from UWC. Tasneem actually did a PhD with me, and She did the majority of her PhD work in Germany with the leader in the field of human coronaviruses. And that group actually isolated SARS CoV2 at Stellenbosch in a very high level security lab. So please go do a search on the UWC website, the news website, and you will see the evidence over there. In fact, the day Tasneem suspected she isolated me, she sent me a very excited voice note to say, I'm seeing evidence of something growing in the monkey cells that we're using. I think I have this virus. And a week later, she dropped me a WhatsApp and she says, we have it. And for that reason, drugs and vaccines can be tested in the lab. You need the virus to test these things in the lab. Without the virus, you can't test it in the lab. We can't test it on people.
Awesome. Can you, okay, so I'm just going to get the details from you and maybe just link that, link it to the description on this video. So when people are watching this, just pause this video and then go down to the description box and then you'll see it there. Okay, so I'm so glad that we are getting, rid of some of the worries and concerns, especially with, there's an overload of information, as you said, and it's nice to know that there's names attached to things that have been done in the past.
And don't feel bad about that question, because for some reason I've received that question so many times in interviews. So it's a very, very common myth.
Yes, I hear it a lot that from my own family as well, that they haven't isolated the virus and so forth. Okay, so I see here in the chat one more question about another question about Dr. Kerry Mullins. Also states that if you amplify any particles enough, you can basically find anything you want.
And that's what I said. So for these tests to be approved, they need to be very sensitive and find very small levels of the genetic material in your body. And these tests are sensitive enough to pick that up. So what he's saying is, and what that is speaking to is, how many times do you multiply the genetic material? So these tests are optimally sensitized to pick up just enough so that we can be fairly sure, with almost 100% certainty, that you are infected with the virus at that point in time. And it's called amplification cycles. So if I have one piece of genetic material, it becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 16. So, and that's why it took time for the PCR test to be optimized, because you can't make it detect too high levels of genetic material, and it can't be too low. So what is that optimal to be confident that you have infection? And that's what these tests are doing.
Okay. Cool. And then the next question is, or comment is, that Ricardo Marman has taken Cyril Ramaphosa, our president, to court on the 27th of May, and they could not provide it, I guess, the SARS COVID isolated sample. So this person gives a link here. I mean, we can't open it right now, but if you are here and you want to voice your comment, please do so. But if not, Bertie, do you want to respond? I don't know if you know this case.
So this is not me having hearsay that I know of somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who's isolated the virus. This virus has been isolated from patients globally. There is something called Koch's postulates, and for viruses, it's been modified, and it is showing that a particular pathogen, in this case, the virus, causes the disease. That has been done. This virus has been isolated from patients, and certain animals have been infected in the laboratory. So this is not hearsay. This is my ex-PhD student working in somebody else's laboratory who was isolated the virus. So it is simply not true. You cannot do the testing of drugs, and you cannot do the testing of the vaccines if you do not have a good animal model that can be infected by the virus, or testing the virus in the laboratory in human or animal cells. You need the live virus. And we will share the link so that people can go look at the link and the amazing work that was done by Stellenbosch Medical School at Tygerberg and UWC working together.
Okay, that warms my heart, because I actually thought you were going to mention a study in the UK that, you know, did it
No,
but it's actually somebody that's a UWC alum.
that was the first. She's still at UWC. She's a postdoc at UWC. And Professor Megan Shaw is in medical biosciences in the department, in the Faculty of Natural Sciences at UWC.
Fantastic.
So that was the South African isolate.
That was the South African. You know,
the first time in South Africa it was isolated, yes. And then remember about what was toward the end of last year, when there was also a big uptake in VITS isolating the variants in the laboratory. So it is simply not true.
I think this discussion is so important, because a lot of people that I know that's in the high risk category, firstly, do not believe that COVID exists. And I have to say, as somebody that had COVID in July last year, it is not a joke. It took me 2.5 weeks to get through it. And then months later, I still had the effects of COVID. Brain fog I'm being very euphemistic when I say brain fog. I could hardly speak. And I don't even understand why that happened, but it was a terrible, terrible, infection. But thankfully, you know, I'm here. We are here. Many people actually have gotten it, and thankfully have gotten over it. I noticed that some people a little bit younger than me have it for 3 days, and then they're fine. And so they're very mild symptoms. Yeah.
80 of the confirmed, laboratory confirmed cases, about 87% have mild symptoms. The numbers are actually much higher, in my opinion. I think at the end of this pandemic, we're going to see between 20 and 30% of South Africans were infected, because a very big portion of people never get tested because they are asymptomatic. So there are no symptoms. They can still spread the virus, but they have either very, very light symptoms or no symptoms at all. And you're right. I mean, I mentioned I was in hospital for nearly 2 weeks. And if you look at my interviews before hospitalization and the interview we're currently doing, you'll see I have to think a bit longer about what I'm saying and how I'm saying it because of the brain fog. And it is not unique to COVID. There are long flu symptoms as well. Other viral infections have very similar type of patterns. And for you, it could resolve in a month. My wife is back at gym 3 weeks after she had COVID. I was told I can't go running up to probably end of November, maybe February. Each person is different. And we're forgetting that conversation. Each person is different.
And if anyone has a question, please interrupt me. Please feel free. You can do that. Also, one of the things that I've noticed is that nobody talks about the building blocks of your immune system. Every government that I've seen, every COVID post online, people talk about the vaccine, and then there's the pro and anti-vaccine. And I get laughed at when I say this. What about eating our vegetables and fruit, drinking water, getting some moderate exercise and sunlight, and just basically keeping ourselves, our mental health, as well as our physical health up? Why are we not talking about this? And isn't it important for your immune system? Because everything's about the immune system.
So there were studies initially that showed those with strong immune systems, when they became infected, had more severe symptoms. That is not really supported anymore. We now know that there are very clear predisposing conditions. And one that we forget is obesity. We talk about high blood pressure, we talk about heart disease, we talk about diabetes, obesity, being overweight, is a huge risk factor. Speak to medical doctors, and they will tell you more and more of the patients that they are seeing for severe COVID have weight problems. So we need to be very aware of that. Keep your immune system as healthy as possible. You know what is the thing with the sunlight? It is, as soon as you're exposed to sunlight, your body produces vitamin D. There are very clear studies that show countries with the lowest incidence of severe COVID and COVID infections, their population had the highest levels of vitamin D in their bodies. And that's why when you're ill, you will hear they say, boost on vitamin D. There's some very good studies that point to that. There's some very good studies that showing the countries with the highest death rates, they have the highest levels of obesity. The USA, look at their numbers. I've seen studies that say between 30 and 40% of Americans are obese or overweight. So you're correct. There seems to be, and more studies coming out showing our diet can also have some interplay. But even now, you have one study that says yes and another study that says no. We've only been studying this virus for 18 months, and we need more data and more studies.
Another big question, a really huge question, I think, on the heart of lots of parents is, should our kids be vaccinated? I know you also have kids, so that's quite a question.
Yes. So this is a very difficult one. My straight answer, my initial opinion is no. Kids can be infected. The vast majority of kids are asymptomatic. When they do show symptoms, extremely mild. Those who are in support of vaccinating kids would say, but they can spread it to others. However, we are not even clear how many or what percentage of kids that are infected can spread the virus. There are studies that say that show anything between 10 to 20% of transmissions are due to kids, but you can see 10 to 20, that's a huge difference, so we don't know. There are studies that say as high as 13% of global COVID cases are kids under 18. Yes, there are deaths in the under 18 age group, but if you look at those deaths, even in these groups, the overwhelming majority have comorbidities, and very often more than one comorbidity. So my answer for vaccinating kids is, show me the scientific data that necessitates vaccinating the kids, because I cannot see it at this point in time. Protect the kids who are at highest risk of severe COVID, those with comorbidities. Then it would make sense.
I really hope that a lot of parents hear that. Lucille?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to ask as well, thank you for answering that, Prof. Fielding. In terms of when you actually, thank God I haven't had COVID yet. I suppose at some stage we always hear that we're all going to get it at some stage. So a lot of people don't really know that they have comorbidities until they become ill or until they get vaccinated. So, for example, if you're saying strategically you would want, those specific strategically, I hear you. I get that it makes sense to strategically vaccinate. But what happens if you think you are all healthy and you're fit and you're gymming and whatever, and suddenly find out you didn't vaccinate? And so you hear of these stories, and I've heard of stories where someone didn't even realize that they had underlying comorbidities and actually died of COVID. So I guess it's a difficult one. What is your take on that?
So Lucille, it's not about hearing, you've heard those stories. I'm a case in point. I've always said that I'm low risk of severe disease because I do not have underlying comorbidities. Turns out I have inflammation in my body due to another condition. And that's why it's important to sit down and do that risk ratio, risk benefit ratio. And if you're not sure of your medical history, and I know a very large group of our population is probably not sure of their medical history, sit down and make an informed decision. And that's why I'm not against the vaccine or for the vaccine. I believe everybody should make that decision. And if there's doubt, by all means, take the vaccine. And that is the risk. You're 100% right. And I think the vaccine all group would convince more people if they use that argument and not the blame game. Because then you could probably have more people would, especially if you're not familiar with your medical history, then you would probably be more willing to take the vaccine. So that's a very, very valid point. And it happened to me.
Yeah.
So my chances of ending up in ICU was still low, but for severe disease, obviously with the basal level of inflammation higher, there was a risk and I ended up in hospital. Sure.
Wow, I'm glad that you survived, Prof. Fielding.
Thank you. And just remember, so I hear that a lot, and I'm very thankful when people say, we're glad that you survived, but a very small percentage of people who end up in hospital actually die. I know we're talking about 2 to 3%,
yes,
and it almost sounds insensitive when you say it's a small number. So I don't mean it with insensitivity or blasé. I've lost family, but we must not lose the perspective that if you look at the number of people that's infected, the number of people who end up in hospital and the number of people who are dying, it is 2 to 3%. So you know what I'm saying? So it is somebody's family and it's always sad, but we need to keep that in mind. And I used to make that very clear to my students when I lectured virology. We cannot be insensitive and say, it's only 75,000 people. That's 75,000 husbands and wives and sons and daughters. So it is not as simple a figure as what we're making it out to be.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Lucille, can I just interrupt you?
Yeah,
for 1 second? Another question was, does South Africa record vaccine adverse events?
So we are obliged to, we need to, and it needs to be reported, even with Pfizer being approved by the FDA for use in the USA now. So it's no longer emergency use. Adverse effects still need to be reported. So yes, they are obliged to. As soon as you have adverse effects, it is reported. If there's a cluster, so there's a number now, then it is investigated. Even those 1 or 2, and the investigation needs to determine whether it's due to the vaccine or not. Is it indirectly linked to the vaccine? Is it directly linked to the vaccine? So there are investigations and it must be reported, yes. A couple of years ago, probably about 10 years ago, I was given medication by my doctor for heartburn. And I had very weird side effects. And I spoke to the doctor and he said, that is not a listed side effect. A month and a half later, the drug was pulled from the market, that was added. I'm not saying it was my doctor who reported it, but it was investigated, obviously, and it was added, and it's now on the pamphlet. So it's not unique to this. There are protocols that have to be followed, yes.
And where do people go to report adverse effects? Is it that service?
It would be, there are online sites as well, but also to your primary healthcare provider.
Oh, okay.
But there are, if your side effects last longer than 3.5 days, please go see your primary healthcare provider. Okay. For a percentage of people, it feels like a flu. You don't feel good. Some people say, oh, I have COVID. These vaccines cannot give you COVID. It's a small piece of a protein of the virus, so it can't give you COVID. And if it persists, go speak to your medical healthcare provider, your primary one, as soon as possible, so that they can report and they can treat you. Even the adverse ones, the inflammation of the heart, heart muscle, and blood clots can be treated. So it needs to be picked up early enough.
Yeah, that I think is a fear that a lot of people pick up on. They'll pick up on that very small number, a percentage of people that could have adverse effects. But I guess nobody wants to be that. I don't want to be that percentage as well.
Of course.
I have a question that was emailed. If the Pfizer vaccine is meant to reduce hospitalization and death, what could be the reason for people who are fully vaccinated still dying of COVID? I know 2 people, one was 74 years old. 2 days after his second jab, landed in hospital with COVID and passed away. Today, 52-year-old friend of mine, fully vaccinated, passed away to COVID, weeks after his second jab. I know these are very specific cases, so I don't know if you can respond to this.
So unfortunately, not everybody who is vaccinated, and the numbers are still being debated. Not everybody who's vaccinated generate an immune response, so there won't be no protection. So there are some cases of people with the immune system is not working properly. So some of them can have no antibodies produced, so they will not be protected. Some people are infected by the time they get their vaccine. Remember with Pfizer's 2 shots, after the first shot, you can still be infected. You need that second shot about 28 days later. You can be infected before, you can be infected between, and you can be infected afterwards. And that's why I said, unfortunately, we're going to see these type of cases as well, because no drug, no vaccine is 100% effective. In fact, if you look at the flu shot every year, some of those flu shots in some years are only 50% effective. Yeah, we're talking still about, when it comes to hospitalizations, depending on the vaccine, between 70 and 98, 99%. But you will have these anomalies. After the first shot for Pfizer, the immune system is switched on. It's not at its optimal strength. You need that second shot 28 days later. Some studies are now starting to show maybe 45 days later to make the immune system as strong as possible. So you only have optimal immune system with Pfizer after the second shot, and not immediately afterwards. It takes about 3 to 4 weeks after you receive one of the shots for the immune system to start working and offer protection. So it's not an immediate thing, unfortunately.
Okay, and so there are some people that pass away, and that might mean that they got COVID in between or soon after. And I mean, I remember this person said 74 years old, so that person was also quite elderly,
And we need to keep in mind and ask the question: did this person die of COVID, or was the person COVID positive when they died? This is also not the discussion that we want to have, but I think that's also very, very important.
Yeah.
Because if somebody dies of a heart attack and they're COVID positive, what did the person die of? I know that's a very complex debate, but yes, we will still see, unfortunately, some of these cases, but they should be in the minority.
Okay, so I've got, and actually I'm just going to skip over one question, because this other one, I also heard it on the radio. The news is saying that hospitals, and the DJ was talking about how, I won't mention which DJ because I can't remember, and I don't remember radio stations, but anyway, so the news is saying that hospitals are full of unvaccinated people. Is the information transparent as to who had 1 shot and didn't take their second shot yet, or who took their second shot and are sick or died within that 14 days being called unvaccinated? So that is the question. Okay, my question was slightly different, but should I read that again?
No, so this is a study from, this is a report from Groote Schuur Hospital.
Yes, and that's the one I heard, yeah.
So you look at studies from abroad as well. They're all saying that unvaccinated people are ending up, by far the majority of people hospitalized, dying, and severe disease. What typically is left out are the age groups and what comorbidities these people have.
Yeah.
If you are at high risk, take the vaccine. I'm sure if you go look at those unvaccinated people, they were in their high-risk groups.
Yeah.
So
that was exactly what I was thinking. That was exactly what my question I would have asked the DJs. Of those people that were unvaccinated, how many of them were in the high-risk group that we all can agree should have gotten vaccinated? Because it's probably not a 38-year-old that's laying there that's in full health, you know.
So you know, I mean, I've learned now. As soon as I read or hear one of these stories in the newspaper or on the radio, I do not go read, just take it at face value. I go find the scientific study that this is based on. And that scientific study will tell you, these are the limitations of the study, these are the people we looked at, blah, 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 blah. It makes it very difficult for the non-scientists out there. But I fully believe the stats that the vast majority of people in hospital with severe illness currently and hospitalization and death are unvaccinated. But what are we talking about? Which group of unvaccinated are we talking about?
I think that we really need to start segmenting things here, because I've seen people on Facebook saying that if you're not vaccinated, like, please unfollow me because I don't know. I don't like people that's so like dumb, basically, that's what they're saying. And I was like, I was really hurt because I'm thinking, yeah, there's so much more to the story. It's much more nuanced than just like everybody should get vaccinated and that's it, you know.
I mean, I've been called a WHO puppet. I've been accused of being paid by the WHO. Even though I'm not in favor of vaccinating all, I wish somebody would pay me for these interviews and things that I do. I've been called an idiot. I've been called uneducated. I've been called a buffoon from both sides. That's unfortunately the society we're living in. It's easier to bully people and make accusations because we're not face to face.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so we've got the question that's relates to, you know, Israel being, I think, the most vaccinated country in the world. So at the moment, Israel is busy with the third booster shot because more than 50% of the unvaxxed are in hospital. India is almost COVID-free because of including ivermectin. There are months of evidence-based studies on the FLCCC website. I don't know what that is, proving ivermectin has been successful. Why does the Department of Health not encourage it, as it is a 40-year-old safe drug on the WHO list of essential medicines, including hydroxychloroquine? Chlorine, it's a long word, okay.
So unfortunately, in science and in medicine, for something to be approved, you need to follow very clear clinical study guidelines. So studies need to be done in a very specific way. There are studies that have been done that shows ivermectin works, but it is very small groups and it's not always done in clinically sound ways. So there are very good observational studies and very good anecdotal studies that show that it works. But like I said, there are also observational studies that will show you it does not work. So we're waiting on the large clinical trials to come out so that we can make a final decision on ivermectin, and then it can be a yes or no. So yes, that's unfortunately how science and medicine works. You need to have very clear clinical studies to prove whether something works or not. There are some very nice studies that shows it kills the virus in the lab.
Great.
But how does it kill? We don't even understand that. What is it stopping? You know, so, but it has been approved for compassionate use. So speak to your doctor if you have severe COVID or your family members in ICU, speak to your doctor.
Yes, I actually know people that stockpile ivermectin just in case they need it. They've got it on hand, and there are doctors that dispense ivermectin here in South Africa. I'm not going to say whether or not people should take ivermectin. I know 8 family members, family and friends of mine that took it because they got very, very sick. And 7 of them responded very well. In like almost less than 12 hours, they were feeling much better. And that was from a hospital case to home. But there was one that, that got very, very sick after that. After that.
And that's exactly the point. So I've heard these stories as well, that somebody takes ivermectin and 8 to 12 hours later, they feel so much better.
Yeah.
So those are the type of stories that is anecdotal, observational. And it could very often be those people feel better because ivermectin also has an anti-inflammatory effect on the body. And when you're severely ill with COVID, there's excess inflammation in your body. So it could be that. And that's what I'm saying. You need probably studies that have been properly. Yes, that's the COVID brain. That's the COVID brain.
Yeah.
That has been done in a way that we can trust what the study is showing. And the studies are still small. Yes, so I always, when I'm asked this question, I had this conversation with my primary healthcare provider. And when I became severely ill, I had a discussion with him and I received ivermectin. But he knows my history, so he knows what drugs I'm on. He knows what it can interact with. And that's why it's a bad idea just to take this willy-nilly. I would not advise that.
Yeah. So I would say definitely I would agree. If it's very, like if it's do or die, I mean, you might as well take something, you know, and hopefully it'll work. 2 questions or 3 questions, and then it's time's up. And that's why I said an hour and a half. I knew we were going to fill it very quickly. Okay, very quickly. So is one vaccine better than the other? Most people believe that Pfizer vaccine is more effective than J&J. What do you think?
So currently the data is showing that for certain vaccines, the antibody levels drop faster, and the antibody levels and effectiveness, how well it protects you, is different for the different vaccines. But it's very important that when we look at this data, we need to look at when the studies were done, against which variant was it done? In what age group was it done? In what gender was the study done? In what demographic was it done? Black population, Indian population, all of those have different effects on how well these things work. Some vaccines have been studied longer than others, so we know more about certain than others. And that's why when Pfizer reports side effects, people say, you see, we have not seen that for Johnson & Johnson. My response is always, hang on. Pfizer has been studied probably 3-4 months longer than Johnson & Johnson. So I wouldn't be surprised 3-4 months down the line, we see the same side effects for Johnson & Johnson. So be very careful when you read about which vaccine is more effective, because it depends on a whole bunch of other factors as well. In you, it could depend on what drugs you're using, what medication you're on. It could be determined, it could be influenced by your gender, because there's this discussion about hormones. How does hormones influence and determine how effective it is? I have testosterone, you have more estrogen. I could be on high blood pressure medication that makes it less effective. People living in England, they're genetically different to people living in South Africa. So we cannot generalize when we look at this. What happened with AstraZeneca when the president went to the airport to welcome the plane with AstraZeneca, and then the study came out and they said, in our younger population, it was only 25% effective. And we sold it. We never used it. Now there are studies that are showing AstraZeneca is extremely effective in older people, and they're very effective against Delta. So you need to keep even age groups in mind, and the risk profile of the people, obviously, that's being vaccinated.
Thank you. I think that is the kind of answer we haven't gotten about, because everyone tells me Pfizer is better than Johnson & Johnson, and that's it, because 92% efficacy and things, but I'm glad to hear that there's more things, like I think with COVID and with the vaccinations and with antibodies, there's more to be discussed here. Okay, so the next question, I think this is a comment, and it's a very lovely, insightful comment that I think we can all agree on. I feel like the whole issue between two groups is divide and conquer, as the other groups look down. Actually, they both look down on one another. And so hopefully this will change. That's the comment. Okay. And so this is, but you don't have to respond, because I just want to say, yes, if you have a very strong view, remember you live in your body. The person that you are arguing with lives in a totally different body, and the advice that you believe is right for them might not actually work. So I think at the end of the day, we should all do this thing that we all know. It's called respect. We should be respecting one another. And I've got a lot of people saying, yeah, but if you love somebody, you can't just allow them to die. You do not know. Nobody can control death. So as much as I'm sitting here at 38, I'm feeling very healthy, I can still get knocked over by a car. I keep giving people these examples because I want us to remind ourselves that fear, a lot of people are living in fear of the vaccinated, fear of the unvaccinated, and this is actually terrible for our immune system, because that's going to break us down mentally, I think, and also physically, because people will start getting sick just thinking about all of these things. So if you're watching this, take a moment. I'm telling you right now, take a deep breath in, go on a COVID fast, watch my previous video, go on a COVID fast, and stop watching all the videos and things like that for a while, and just maybe reconnect with yourself and in nature. Okay, so here goes the, okay, two more. So someone is mentioning that COVID is still in clinical trials. It was in clinical trials, but now this is the actual rollout with humans. Am I right, Bertie?
The vaccine, so Pfizer has been approved. Some of the other drug companies are also applying to the FDA for approval. And that's the process that will be followed. Remember, we said earlier, ethically, if you have a drug or a vaccine or an intervention that can save lives, you're ethically bound to make it available to people. I mean, as a scientist, as a researcher, informed consent. I've not, this past 19 months, I've not been able to convince anybody to take the vaccine or not. I've given them the information, the positive and the negatives, and they have decided. And in the vast majority of cases, people have decided to go for the vaccine. Even though I would have told them, but you don't have to go for the vaccine. But based on the information that they have, like you say, I don't know what people's risk benefit ratio conversation to themselves are. So I have the conversation, and it's your decision. If you feel that you're not at risk, but you closely work with somebody that is at risk, or family member that is at risk, and they cannot for some reason take the vaccine, or they do not want to take the vaccine, why don't you take the vaccine? Because that way you would protect them. Those are the type of conversations that I have to have in my mind.
Yeah, but that I just don't understand that part where you just said, like, so can you protect somebody else by taking the vaccine? Because I thought you can't protect somebody else.
So remember that not everybody is equally protected, but you lessen the chances of transferring it into somebody else because your symptoms are much less
because
severe.
Your symptoms will be less severe.
So your viral load is low. So the risk to that person is not as high as what it would have been with a very high viral load, especially with Delta. Delta is not deadlier. There is no data to show that it's deadlier. It is spreading easier, which means my cells will now take in more virus. So I will be expelling more virus from the nose and mouth as well. If I take the vaccine, I can still be infected. I can still spread the virus, but the viral load is less. And that's why if I'm visiting high-risk family, even though I've been infected and I'm still recovering, I would still be wearing a mask because it is really about protecting those around us. It is no matter what we do, and If I'm wrong, I will come on your show when the data comes out and proves me wrong. But I am looking at the data historically and what we're currently seeing. We will not be able to stop this virus in its tracks. We're going to slow it down, and we will not be able to remove it from the human population. This thing is going to be with us. We need to find ways to live with it. And it is about protecting high-risk people. What do we tell people every year with the flu shot? Listen to what government says. Those who are at high risk of severe flu, please go take your shot.
Yeah.
Why is this different?
100%. I want to play that on a loudspeaker. Okay, we have 2 minutes left, so I want to go to this last question. The creator of the mRNA vaccine technology, Dr. Robert Malone, says that the spike proteins being created are toxic. Pfizer has added pericarditis and myocarditis as their side effects, and this person gives a link to that as well. So the Pfizer vaccine has not been approved. Only the Comirnaty, Comirnaty, for individuals 16 years and older has been approved, which also is the same ingredients as in the normal Pfizer vaccine. So there's actually like 2 comments there, or 2 questions there.
So that is partially correct. So as soon as Pfizer received approval from FDA, they actually changed it from the Pfizer vaccine to the brand name. And that's Comirnaty. That's the brand name of the Pfizer vaccine. It's exactly the same thing. The mRNA, the spike protein, yes, can have certain effects in the body. We are not looking at the entire spike protein in these vaccines. It's a very small portion of the spike protein, and it's the portion that is important for the virus attaching to the human cell to get into the cell. So it's not the whole spike protein. So we must be very careful our inferences there. And that's exactly what I said with Pfizer. Pfizer has listed as an adverse side effect, inflammation of the heart muscle with a sac around the heart. Very, very small percentage of people globally. Johnson & Johnson has listed blood clots. So different vaccines would list these different side effects as the evidence comes out. But the adverse side effects, very, very small fraction of a percentage of the billions of doses that's been given worldwide. So just be very careful. The vaccine is now under a different brand name. So I can go to the shop and I can go buy paracetamol, and I can get different brand names of paracetamol, but it's still the same thing, really.
Okay, that's very important, because I saw somebody else's card and they said to me, oh my God, I didn't get Pfizer, I didn't get Johnson & Johnson, what are they giving me? And it was this Comirnaty thingy. And I was like, I don't know what they're giving you. So it's still Pfizer, but it's just a different name. Okay, so I see this one last point question. How is not one approved and in trials and the other one approved? Okay, so basically how is Comirnaty, whatever way it's pronounced, approved for kids with the same ingredients as Pfizer?
No, so each of the vaccines were tested in particular groups first, and then it was rolled out. So that initial studies were the phase 2 studies, and those are studies where you have 40,000 people, for instance, 20,000 get the vaccine, whichever vaccine it is. The other 20,000 get something that looks like the vaccine, but it's really just salt water. So it's a placebo. Then you compare and you say, oh, people in here were 90% of people here did not get the virus. Compared to this group, this is effective, so the vaccine works. Then we went and we looked at globally. Now everybody gets it. But now we're bringing in real world issues. What is my age? What is my diet? What medication am I on? So all of those factors come in. That was done, and safety was established in those initial studies and in these big studies for adults only. Now these companies are going back and they're saying, we've looked at those. Now let's test it in pregnancy and breastfeeding and test it in kids. So the first one was Pfizer that went, and they tested it in kids 12 to 16 or 12 to 18. They then said, okay, it's safe, now we can roll it out. Now the next studies are coming and saying, let's look how safe it is in kids from 6 to 12. Once you have that data, then it can be rolled out to bigger, if it is safe. So it is looking at the safety in different cohorts of the population. So it's still the same thing.
Thank you so much. I hope that many of you watching and those that joined live got the answers that you needed. I'm going to also save the chat as well so that I can add the links. Add UWC's Tasneem link from UWC website. I want to say thank you so much, Prof. Fielding, and everybody that came to join. Faces or no faces, it doesn't matter. You know, subscribers, I don't even see people, so I'm just saying. I hope you all stay healthy and safe. Make a decision that's good for your heart, that's literally good for your heart, good for your soul. And remember, if people have a different view from you, that's okay, because they're in a different body and they should be making the choices that they feel comfortable with. So thank you so much. Please go and have supper with your family and enjoy. Thank you, Lucille,
Thank you, Prof.
Nasana, Fauzi, and Stacey.
Thank you so much. Only a
Thank you,
pleasure.
Prof. Fielding. Very
That's a pleasure.
informative. Thank you, Amina, for arranging it. I still wanted to talk about the waves. We'll talk about that another time. There was no
Yes,
Definitely.
we will talk about it next.
I'll go to the beach in the meantime.
Enjoy.
Good idea. Okay, bye
Okay,
everyone.
thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Guys, I have to save the chat, so you'll still see me doing my bit, but I do hope that you enjoy this. I'm just saving the chat. It's just me doing my thing. I'm sure there's a better way of doing this. But yeah, let me know in the comment section of this video what you think. What was your takeaways? Were you surprised by any of the responses by Prof. Fielding? Was there anything in the questions that you could really relate with? You were like, oh my goodness, thank God somebody's finally answering my question. And most importantly, was there anything that was left out? And with that, I will say much love, always. Bye-bye.